used to work in a casino. One night, I was approached by an elderly woman asking about paging someone over the intercom. I tried explaining where to go, but she insisted I personally walk her to the desk where they can do that. As I walked her through the casino, she started talking to me. She mentioned that she was a medium and how her family has strictly advised her against sharing that information with people. When you work in a casino, you encounter a lot of scammers and odd people. I was polite, but tried not to engage with her much on that topic. As we kept walking, she said something to me about my sister. I stopped and asked how she knew my sister. She didn't, but started talking to me at great lengths about my family itself. At this particular time, my sister was going through a very difficult time herself, and it was impacting our family as a whole. I was obviously skeptical, but curious. As she went on, I was careful to neither confirm nor deny anything, just listen to what she had to say. She went into great detail about how my father, mother, and even I played into the current situation. She even began to become visibly emotional, as if she could feel what my mother was feeling. I was utterly astonished, and as she told me that, being the oldest and the most diplomatic in my family dynamic, I needed to be more outspoken with everyone involved. Everything she told me was undeniably accurate and insightful. But then, she shifted her focus. She told me about someone I worked with, then went into great detail about what this person looked like and how they felt about me. She talked about the dynamic between us and advised me to take caution. At this point, she had lost me. I couldn't think of a single person or relationship in my working life that fit that description. I began becoming more skeptical once again and reminded her that I needed to get back to work and to keep walking towards our destination. She just kept talking to me as we walked, and I began to once again find myself astonished, as not to just what she was telling me, but also how she would go about it. Her body language, expressions, and emotional energy. As we got closer, she abruptly stopped walking. When I noticed, I did as well and turned back to her. Before I could say anything, she placed her palm at the base of my sternum, above my belly button and just below where my rib cage started. Immediately, I noticed a physical sensation. I became paralyzed and almost felt like she was stealing the breath from my body. I started becoming hyper aware of my surroundings. The lights and dings from electronic games. The mass amount of people walking by. But everything seemed to be in slow motion, or almost as if I was leaving my body. It could have only been a few seconds, or it could have been 20 minutes, I don't know. But I felt as if I couldn't breathe and weakness in my knees. I started to feel like I was on the verge of passing out. The casino security saw this encounter and began approaching us. When security interrupted us to ask what was going on, it must have startled her because I felt this shockwave through my entire body. She jerked her hand back and started apologizing profusely to me. As she pulled her hand back, I was able to breathe again and gain control back of my body. I was completely freaked out. It must have been 100% visible because the security kept asking me if I was okay. I assured them I was completely fine, and then they walked off. I turned back to the woman still apologizing, and she said, "If you don't do something about that ulcer, it's gonna kill you." I was so freaked out. I told her thanks, but I have to go back to work now, and quickly headed back to my office. Not only was I in a bizarre headspace, but I noticeably was completely void of physical energy. This entire experience was the most profound encounter of my life, and I will never forget those words and that physical sensation. I was having a lot of stomach issues at the time, but I was far too scared to get medical verification if it was an actual ulcer. I had already previously suspected it, and it was a potential side effect of the medication I was on at the time. But if that wasn't bizarre enough on its own, it gets even weirder. That encounter happened nearly 10 years ago, and it has sat with me ever since. But recently was reflecting back on it. I realized that second part about the coworker that initially made no sense at all of a sudden did. That entire situation played out in my life a few years ago. The description of the person and the very specific details were 100% spot on from what was described to me 10 years ago. I even realized that the entire situation was initiated nearly 7 years to the day from the moment this woman described it to me. Not only were the two incidents separated by 7 years, but the person she described I hadn't even met yet and was in an entirely different state and company. I don't really know what to make of this. I've come here to see what others' take on it is, and I'm open to this type of stuff, but I've always approached these situations skeptically. I'd love to hear what anyone else has to say about it. Throughout my life, I've had many encounters with ghosts, and this is the story of the first time that I recall. I was maybe 12 or 13, and I'm currently 24, and remember this like it happened yesterday. My mom had bought a new house, hoping for a fresh start. The house needed some cosmetic work, but otherwise it was actually pretty nice. A 3-bedroom, perfect for us, and it had a big fenced-in yard so we could finally have a dog. Once we had moved all of our things in, it seemed great and never really noticed anything too weird at first. But I guess that's how these stories always start. I don't exactly remember the date, but I remember how. Every morning I would wake up to find my closet door open, and obviously wouldn't think too much of it. My sister was around 6 then, and she was always getting into my stuff, so I just assumed it was her. Not too long later, I began having weird dreams about a shadow man that stood inside that closet. I knew and felt he was watching me, but I was way too scared to move or say anything. This would repeat and happen every single night, and it began affecting my sleep so much to the point I was falling asleep in class. My mom asked what was going on with me. I explained my dreams, and at first she brushed it off as a reoccurring nightmare. One day I got this bright idea to bring all my heavy school books home and put them in front of my closet door, thinking that maybe it would stop this creep from watching me. The next morning I woke up in horror to see my book bag with those books pushed aside and the door again open. Now I knew this was real. I told my mom everything, and she decided to do some digging online about our house. No idea why she didn't do this prior to us buying it, but she couldn't find anything. She went around our neighborhood, asking anyone if they knew anything about our house. She got some information that a drug dealer used to live in our house and was apparently murdered and stabbed multiple times. Honestly, I don't know how my mom felt. She put on a tough front and figured out a way to cleanse it. The story doesn't end here. The last time he appeared to me was probably the most terrifying. One night while trying to fall asleep, I heard the door creak open, and stupidly, I looked. I see the man again, but this time, I can see his face. He was a heavier set guy with a bald head. He had dark colored eyes and a blank look on his face, kind of sad looking. He had a tattoo on his neck and he was probably in his 40s. I can still picture him clear as day. That night I ran into my little sister's room and slept on her floor. The next day we were playing outside when a car I didn't recognize pulled into our driveway. My mom came outside, concerned about the stranger, but a young girl hopped out and she had to be 17 or 18, not too sure. Her and my mom began talking for a while, and then my mom called me over. The girl explained she used to live here and it was her dad who was killed in the house. In fact, she was in the house when it happened, along with both of her grandparents. She told us that her dad decided to quit drug dealing so he could be better for his daughter. Then one day, a guy who was looking for some drugs came by and didn't like the fact that he couldn't get any. They began arguing and broke out into a huge fight. And when her dad tried to make him leave, well, he died protecting his family. After hearing this, I became overwhelmed with emotion. This was a lot for a young teen to take in. My mom asked me if I could explain to her what I'd seen. So I did. I described his face and this girl started to cry. She said, "That's my dad." I was so confused and honestly kind of scared. She pulled out a picture and showed me, and sure enough, it was her dad. And it was the ghost inside my closet. My mom let her walk through the house one last time. After that day, I never saw him again. No more dreams. And my closet never opened on its own again. I'm a male in my 20s from Ireland, and the incidents I'm going to relate to you occurred about 3 years ago. I stress that everything I tell you here is 100% genuine. I've had a few small things happen to me over the years, but I've always wondered about a cluster of incidents, which occurred over a very short period of time while I lived in the Diggs house in college. Hopefully someone may be able to shed some light onto what I experienced. It was my first year. I had started college and settled into Diggs accommodation in Dublin, Ireland. Diggs, for anyone who doesn't know, is somewhere where students live when in college, and usually involves renting a room with a family in their home at a fraction of the cost. I was living with an older lady and her 2 adult sons, but of who were older than me and quite pleasant. The lady herself was nice, if a little old-fashioned, and over the first semester, all was well. Near the end of my second semester in April, that was all left them amused. The first occurrence was something I could only explain as bizarre. It happened when I went to go to the toilet in the middle of the night. I slept upstairs along with the rest of the family. My room was closest to the stairs, along with the landing shaped in a U. The bathroom was across the hall at the other end of the U, a good 10 to 15 strides away. I used the toilet and all was well. I tried to be as quiet as possible returning to my room to not wake anyone. However, I no sooner had the door shut and turned to make the journey back to my room when what I can only imagine and describe as a black fog descended on me. At first I thought my eyes were just playing some kind of trick. Maybe the sudden movements from getting out of bed had caused me to hallucinate, but no, it couldn't be that. This was more than a trick of the mind. It was almost as if I was able to physically swipe at it with my hands and see it move coherently as I did. I was panicked, but didn't feel the need to scream. I tried to fight my way through it, but I barely felt as if I could move. After what felt like maybe 30 to 60 seconds, it cleared, but as it did, it left me dangerously lingering over the top step of the stairs. I could have sworn I took no more than 2 or 3 steps in my panicked daze, but I shook myself down and rushed back into my room, locking the door and leaving the lights on for the rest of the night. The following morning at breakfast, I mentioned nothing and all was normal. Over the next few days, everything was fine until about a week later. This time it was a dream that scared the living shit out of me. I was asleep in my room when I found myself dreaming of a familiar place, my grandmother's home. The house was a typical 2-story Irish farmhouse. It had been renovated about 12 years before my dream, but I was witnessing it as it was when I was a young boy. I can remember taking the details of the old stonework in when the front door opened. It was my grandmother, delighted to see me. "Come in," she exclaimed, greeting me with a huge hug as she guided me into her home just as it was when I was a child, pre-renovation. It is at this point I feel I should disclaim that my grandmother had been dead for about 11 years. She took me to a seat at her kitchen table, made me some tea and a sandwich, and then started talking. I can't distinctively say what she told me, but I remember it being extremely positive, along the lines of, "I'm proud of you and what you've achieved." At this point, I would have been happy for the dream to finish. However, it took a dark twist. I can remember witnessing my grandmother's face begin to twist and contort into something unrecognizable. I got up to run away, and as I did so, I noticed her feet were not human, but hooves, and I imagined were goats. As this being who was once my grandmother took notice of my horror, they echoed a piercing, bellowing screech of laughter, and I woke up at that point. This wasn't like waking from any nightmare or even sleep paralysis. Oh no. I woke to find myself upright in bed, sobbing uncontrollably, with my Diggs lady banging on my door to see if I was okay. After a minute or so of composing myself, I threw on my dressing gown and opened the door to chat with her. I could see she was visibly concerned, and it was obvious to her that I'd been crying. She asked what happened, and I explained that I just had a bad dream. I could see she was apprehensive to even question me further, but I sensed she really wanted to see if I was okay. She looked at me alarmingly and said she had heard me crying for a few minutes now. I looked back at her, horrified, but managed to pass it off with a joke, telling her, "If you didn't laugh at the nightmare I had, You might as well cry. She smiled and told me if I needed anything else to just give her a call. I entered my room once again, now puzzled at how I could have been crying in my sleep. I chalked it off as a freak episode and got myself ready for college. A day later, I returned back to my family home for the weekend. Told my mother of the dream I had about my grandmother. I left out the eerie ending, and she simply just told me to say a few Hail Marys for my grandmother. That was a Saturday, and that night the final incident of this saga occurred. Again, it happened while I was asleep, but this time it was in my own bed in my own house. I awoke too early in the morning for my liking of a Sunday. Looked at my watch on my bedside locker to see it was 5-ish. I was still half asleep, but I could feel a burning sensation coming from my legs. I gave my leg an instinctive itch and was ready to roll over and go back to sleep. However, when I touched my leg, I immediately could feel what could only be described as a 7/8 of an inch long scratch mark on my inner thigh. It was the kind of scratch you associate with an animal. But my dog did not sleep inside our house. It was quite obviously fresh, and my own nails were much too blunt from biting them to even attempt to cause a mark so striking. I have a photo of the scratch on my old phone somewhere, but I remember the photo didn't do it justice. Kind of ignored this incident, and a week later I moved out of my Diggs house and have had not had any kind of experiences even remotely as wild as that one since. At the time I was at a loss for an explanation, and to this day I still am, and never brought up anything that happened with my Diggs family nor my own family apart from telling my mom a vague version of that dream. I would be interested in hearing people's opinions on my stories. And also would like to stress I wasn't under any form of influence from drugs or alcohol at the time, nor was I reading or practicing any sort of occult material. And I actually attended Roman Catholic Mass weekly with my own family. Have any of you experienced anything similar? A few years back, I was lying awake in bed. It was a quiet Sunday morning. I'm usually the first one awake in my house on the weekend. I'm married with 3 kids. I remember this so vividly and clearly because we were in the middle of painting our bedroom and had the curtains off and the room was blindingly bright. I was awake in bed for maybe 10 minutes or so, just lying there while my wife was still asleep, thinking of the day ahead when I heard someone coming up the stairs. Our home is 120 years old, creaky original flooring, and I've heard these sound hundreds of times from my room. Typically a layout at the top of the stairs, one main hall with all of our bedroom doors branching off. Mine being the last one at the end of the hall. I can tell which door in the hall someone is walking to with my eyes closed. And certainly know if someone is coming to mine because I'm the last door. Oftentimes my children go downstairs for water pretty early on, and I assumed this was the case. I heard the steps coming from up the stairs, and then once they reached the top, I could tell they were coming to my room. So lying still, I turned my head to greet what I thought was one of my kids. What happened next is burned into my memory forever. A small head peered around the doorframe and looked directly at me, maybe 3.5 feet from the floor. All I see is what looks like a boy with almost black hair, a disheveled bowl cut, white skin, and black rough cut holes for eyes. We were both startled, and it immediately dashed away. To this day, I still don't know what launched me forward. My instinct was to either convince myself what I'd just seen and catch it, or find out it was one of my kids and I was just hallucinating. It was literally only 1.5 seconds between the time I saw it and me leaping into the doorway looking down into the hall. The thing just vanished. I went into my daughter's room one by one, and they were all very much asleep. I searched my house, basement to attic. Nothing. This house has many stories I could share here, but this one was unlike anything else myself or my family have ever experienced. Hey everyone, thanks for listening if you stuck around at this point. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, and that notification bell to be notified when future episodes come out. If you have a true scary story of your own, feel free to send it to my email or post it to my subreddit. You can stalk me on Twitter, you can stalk me on Facebook, and you can also stalk me on Instagram. All these links are below. What's going on, guys? Thank you again for listening. If you are indeed still listening, I definitely haven't done a paranormal episode in a while, but I enjoy doing these. I'm not sure. I know there's a lot of people that like the ghouls and the ghosties, and there's a lot of people that don't. They like the more stalker, guy breaks into your house and steals all your dildos type of thing. Like that. If that's what you're into, then that's what you're into. Hopefully either way you enjoy it and you like this episode. If not, I'm so sorry. Please leave a bad review in the comment section below, like Leslie always does, about how she's heard these stories before. Hopefully you haven't heard these stories too, Leslie. And that being said, remember to toss a coin to your witcher, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.